All right, let's dive right into this explainer and tackle a deeply uncomfortable psychological truth. We usually think of intelligence as this mental flashlight, right? A tool that cuts through the confusion and helps us find the objective truth. But today, we're actually going to look at the exact opposite scenario. We're exploring why, in some very specific and well-documented cases, intelligence doesn't actually cure bias, it literally weaponizes it. And fair warning, this is going to force all of us to ask some pretty uncomfortable questions about how we process information.
I'm sure you've experienced this core mystery at some point. Why do billion people who are genuinely sharp, well-read, perfectly capable of spotting bad arguments in everyday life, how do they look at the exact same publicly available facts and reach completely opposite conclusions? Well, the comfortable, easy answer we usually tell ourselves is that the person we disagree with just isn't thinking hard enough. But as you'll see, the actual experimental psychology tells a completely different and honestly a fascinating story.
So let's start with part 1, the math problem trap.
To completely shatter that illusion that the other side just isn't thinking hard enough, let's look at a landmark 2013 study by legal scholar Dan Kahan. He gave participants this genuinely tricky math problem. It was a data table from a fictional study, and they had to correctly compare ratios to figure out if a treatment worked. Now, for half the participants, he framed the numbers completely neutrally, like a study testing if a new skin cream cured rashes. But for the other half, he used the exact same numbers and framed it as a highly charged study testing whether a concealed handgun ban reduced crime. Same math, same exact difficulty, just a completely different label. And when it was about the skin cream, something totally reassuring happened. People who were better at math got the answer right more often, regardless of their politics. Intelligence worked exactly like you'd hope it would.
But on the gun control version, the picture flipped completely. When the math contradicted their existing political views, highly numerate partisans were roughly 45% more likely to rationalize their way to the completely wrong answer. Just think about that. When the data was politically inconvenient, the most mathematically skilled participants didn't overcome their bias. They actually got measurably worse at reading the data accurately than people with lower math skills.
Which brings us to part 2, the mechanics of the brain, and what is actually happening up there.
You see, being good at math didn't protect them from bias at all. It just gave them a sharper, much more sophisticated tool to construct a really convincing wrong answer. And this leads us to what researchers call identity protective cognition. This is the idea that on incredibly charged issues, things tied tightly to our group identity, your brain's primary goal actually isn't to find the factually correct answer. Its main priority is to protect your standing within your social and political community. Because being publicly wrong on an identity-defining issue carries massive social costs. You risk strained relationships, losing standing, or just feeling like a traitor to your own tribe. So your brain subconsciously prioritizes belonging over accuracy.
Basically, reasoning skill gets recruited by motivation. In this context, intelligence functions less like a neutral truth detector and way more like a high-priced defense attorney. And a good lawyer's job isn't to uncover the objective truth, right? It's to get their client off the hook. The smarter you are, the better the lawyer your brain hires to defend your existing beliefs. And let's be real, we have all been there, stubbornly lawyering our way out of admitting we were wrong about something completely trivial, just to save face at a dinner party.
Moving on to part 3, intelligence versus rationality. To truly wrap our heads around this, we have to make a critical distinction between two completely different cognitive skills that we usually just lump together. Psychologist Keith Stanovich spent years studying what he called my-side bias, and it's exactly what it sounds like, the tendency to evaluate evidence and generate arguments in a way that is systematically slanted toward your own existing side. His startling discovery, which is backed by dozens of studies, is that this systematic slant correlates only weakly and sometimes not at all with measured intelligence, meaning your IQ score, your working memory, or your processing speed doesn't actually predict how susceptible you are to reasoning your way toward a conclusion you already wanted.
Stanovich argues that intelligence is really just raw cognitive horsepower. It's how much information you can hold in your head and how fast you can process it. Rationality, on the other hand, is the steering wheel. It's whether you actually deploy that horsepower with even-handed scrutiny, subjecting your own side's weak arguments to the exact same rigorous testing that you apply to your opponents. A person can have enormous intellectual horsepower, but if their rationality steering wheel is locked in one direction, they're just going to use that massive engine to drive faster and harder right into their own bias.
Now let's look at part 4, different moral starting lines.
Because here's the thing, not every disagreement is just a case of motivated reasoning distorting a shared set of facts. Sometimes incredibly smart people are reasoning perfectly. They're using their horsepower and their steering wheel effectively, but they're starting from completely different premises. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt proposed that human moral judgment basically rests on 5 distinct intuitive foundations: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. Haidt suggests these act as fast, automatic first impressions. They literally trigger before conscious reasoning even has a chance to begin. Conscious reasoning typically shows up later, mostly to construct a justification for the conclusion your intuition has already reached.
And Haidt's research found something fascinating. People who identify as politically liberal tend to weigh the slices of care and fairness incredibly heavily in their moral judgments. Meanwhile, people who identify as politically conservative tend to draw much more evenly across all 5 slices, including loyalty, authority, and sanctity. This means 2 equally intelligent people can look at the exact identical policy and reach completely opposite conclusions. And it's not because one is failing to reason correctly. It's because they are feeding their sharp reasoning engine through genuinely different moral weightings right from the starting line.
Let's pull this all together in Part 5, Combining the Evidence.
So, when we combine Kahan's research on identity protective cognition with Haidt's differing moral starting lines, we get a pretty uncomfortable picture of societal polarization. Just assuming the people you disagree with are unintelligent, dishonest, or just brainwashed is honestly a factually bad explanation. It is contradicted directly by the data. Neither Kahan's nor Haidt's mechanism requires the other side to be acting in bad faith. The people you disagree with most sharply are very often reasoning just as hard as you are. So the real question isn't why can't they think straight? The question we should be asking is, what identity is this position protecting for them, and which moral foundation are they weighing more heavily than I am?
Which brings us to Part 6, Testing Your Own Bias. And honestly, this is the hardest part.
It's super easy to listen to the science and just nod along, right? Thinking about how perfectly it describes all those other people who disagree with you. But Kahan's data showed this effect is completely symmetric across the entire political spectrum. He didn't find that one side was uniquely bad at this while the other was perfectly objective. No, the bias showed up symmetrically whenever a topic threatened a person's own side. There is absolutely zero scientific evidence that your specific political tribe is magically exempt from identity protective cognition just because you happen to feel really certain that you're right.
So I want to leave you with this ultimate test of your own rationality. Think of the political stance you feel the absolute most confident about. Can you accurately and fairly steelman the opposing argument? Like, can you articulate the strongest, fairest version of your opponent's argument? The version a smart, honest person on the other side would actually agree with, without just turning it into a weak straw man? If you can't, well, it is highly likely that your powerful reasoning engine hasn't been seeking the truth at all. It's simply been recruited by your identity. It's a lot harder to do than it sounds, but it really is the very first step toward true rationality.